Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD, pro natural physique athlete, back with another episode on Swole Radio. Today I'm joined again by Jim Wendler, who is the inventor of 531, which is a really powerful system for building strength and hypertrophy, and as is a celebrated coach and athlete himself, having trained with many elite athletes. So thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it, man. I hope things are well. We talked a little bit prior to this, so I noticed how you now can introduce yourself as pro. Right?
The new intro.
Is that how you introduce yourself to girls and
on my resume?
That's right. Fuck the MD stuff. Put the pro in there.
Oh yeah, exactly.
All right.
So today we're going to be talking about accessory movements for hypertrophy and strength. And I think this is going to be a really fun chat. I think everyone loves talking about accessories, and there's a big question I remember when I was starting out, was kind of choosing your other lifts around the big three. So we're going to be talking about, first of all, is favorite variations of the big three movements, or favorite squat, bench, and deadlift, and then some of the accessory movements that he likes to program for athletes. And we'll talk about some of the advantages of these different lifts, as well as some do's and don'ts and technique tips. So Let's get right into it. I guess starting out, Jim, I wanted to ask you, when choosing your accessory lifts, what should be the goals of having these movements?
Well, I guess technically it depends on what your goals are. So as an example, with the kids that I coach, our primary focus is, we call it, building armor, building mass. Remember, these are, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. So I have a bunch of statements. I always say you want to win the battle of the bus. So when the kids walk, this is football, by the way, in case anyone didn't notice. The battle of the bus means when you walk off the bus, you'll all look strong and huge, okay? Or the prom muscles, or whatever else you want to call, even though girls don't really care, even though we think they do. So, but that, for those kids, if you don't have at least some muscle mass, that's the most important thing, because in order for these kids to get faster and stronger, they need to put on some muscle mass. Mm-hmm. Now, people will always argue, well, bodybuilders, Jay Cutler, Ronnie Coleman, they're not faster than X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, exactly right. They've gone much more overboard. But if you have a kid who's, 6 foot, 130 pounds, my primary goal, besides building a general physical preparedness base, is to put muscle on him. If we can put muscle on him, we can get him stronger. He will be faster. He'll be more agile. And that's just the truth. I think a lot of times I'm going to start going off on a tangent, so I apologize.
Oh yeah, no, go for it.
I think a lot of times we will see the same, let's say you have like a giant linebacker who play in the NFL. I'm just giving this. And he's, 6 foot, 235, and he does all these crazy specific kind of training, and they try to apply that to a, 5'8", 130 pound kid. Well, the issue is he doesn't have the same kind of muscle mass. He needs to get to that point where he can do more specialized stuff. I think a lot of times people try to put at the advanced ideas before they even have any kind of physical base, and that includes building muscle. So with that in mind, the other thing is, once you get to a certain point, let's say you're powerlifting and your main goal is to have even if you're not competitive, you want to have a bigger squat. Mm-hmm. If you already have a ton of muscle mass on there, putting more on is probably not going to help you out, okay? So to do so would probably just take away from whatever else you're doing. So at that point, your assistance work would be only to help build the lift. So I found myself, obviously early on, it was just getting big and, having to get in a pump. That's all I cared about. Well, not all I cared about, but that should have been more of my focus. And then as I, started squatting heavier and heavier, and this is probably 13 years or so into training, then I could specialize a little bit to increase those lifts. And then the other thing is, even at that, when I was 26, 27, 30 years old, I still had to make up for some lost time of muscle building that I didn't address when I was younger, because I was an athlete. Everything was done for athletics, and I didn't have a good grasp on everything I need to do. But the bottom line is muscle mass first. And the funny thing is whenever I bring this up, invariably someone says, well, so-and-so, my uncle, he weighed 165 pounds. He did bench 500 for 38 reps, dude. It's like, well, first you can't use the exception to prove the rule. Yeah. And the other thing is I have been around my life, like some smaller lifters, like 165ers, for example, who were insanely strong. I mean, like the best lifter I've ever seen compete in the meet was a 165er. And so they would use that muscle mass thing, except if I showed you a picture of his back and you saw his chest and his shoulders, you'd be like, holy shit, his back rivals any bodybuilder's back I've ever seen. So even when you're smaller and stuff, that still is incredibly important to build that kind of mass. So, but generally speaking, everyone could use a little bit of, especially younger beginner lifters or especially even older lifters. I think it's super important. Even my parents are 74, 75 years old, and they are always going on these crazy bike trips across Europe or whatever. And I always tell them the most important thing at your age is just to make sure you have muscle mass, because that starts to fade. Yeah. That's a huge thing. And the other thing is this is going off script here, but the other thing at that age, obviously you don't have the testosterone, but you can build some muscle without totally slamming yourself. You don't have to squat 500. You don't have to do singles on the squat. So anyway, there you go. So that's really the primary function, is at least in my eyes, and how I apply it to my kids that I work with. So my 10-year-old son, our training is, he trains every single day. And he has basically 3 facets of his training. And one is what I call GPP or grinder work. This includes calisthenics, body weight movements, a lot of prowler work. His other is for like the main lifts, like we do squat, bench, deadlift. We do all that is what I call the berserker lifts. And the berserker lifts, you do them with Vikings, berserker. We all want just power and speed and precision. And then we have our beefcake lifts, and that's the assistance lifts, and we're just trying to build some muscle. So that's how we divvy up the training. And even though I have to repeat myself probably 300 times a day about what a berserker lift is and what a beefcake lift is and what the grinder is, that's kind of how we divvy it up. So
yeah, anyway, no, that's great. Yeah, I think that'll translate really well to my audience, because I think a lot of people are interested in, building that mass, and like, it's great to hear your perspectives on, just athlete development in general, and how you kind of start off with more, general type training, and then you can always get really, really specific later on.
Yeah, and people have to understand that general training, it's not 6 months, it's 5 years. Like you need to milk that. And especially in this day and age, and I don't want to be the old curmudgeon, but there is a general drop off of general physical preparedness with the kids that we work with. It's really horrid is what it is. Now, it's not their fault, but it's my responsibility to get them there. So we have to spend a lot of time doing all the stuff that most kids 50 years ago would take for granted. And I have tremendous amounts of data on this. And so I still think that prep work is super important. So, and it's like learning a language. Do you speak a language fluently other than English?
No, I don't.
Okay. So when you learn a language, if a kid learns it at a fairly young age, it's very easy for them. Yeah. Now, once you get to a certain point, it's very hard. I mean, you can still do it, but it's not the same. You're not going to have the same results. It's the same thing with general fitness. If you start early, you'll set them up for life. Okay. So that's the same kind of idea.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I like that. So, yeah, I think we'll transition to talking about some of the main lifts, and we'll kind of organize this by lift. So I guess starting off with the squat. To kick it off, maybe just talking about a few in terms of your your main variation of the squat? How do you like to get your athlete squattings in terms of high bar, low bar stances and such?
Okay, so this is probably where I differ with a lot of people. I don't think it matters one bit.
Cool.
If an athlete squats better with a low bar position, maybe a little bit of a wider stance, that's great. If he has to do it high bar, that's fine. If he has to squat on a box, that's fine. If the kid needed a front squat for whatever reason, I don't really care as long as they're doing the squat movement. So that's, I think a lot of people get kind of hung up on that, and they'd like to qualify a lift. Like, oh, he did a squat high bar, like, especially in powerlifting. This always kills me. Like, he squatted 880 with a high bar. I'm like, you know why why that guy uses a high bar? It's not to impress you. It's because he's stronger at a high bar. Because it's powerlifting. That's his whole goal, is to lift as much weight as possible, not to make the lift more difficult. So I am of the idea that as long as you're doing something, that's the most important thing. So we'll just work with the kid as much as we can. Now, obviously, there's some general things, put the bar on your back. Like, we always start with that stuff. And we always start with, the basic stance, and then we'll start farting around from there and see how the kid does. So one of the big things is, just like I talked about with my son, we use the main lifts. We never overload them to a point where, like, the form starts breaking down. So we use that same idea. We want, on the main list, we want power, speed, perfection. Every rep is perfect. You're not just doing this on the bench. You're boom, locking out, having a great eccentric phase. It's not just flopping down on your chest, stuff like that. So with the squat, I don't just like any other lift, really, it doesn't really matter. To me, it doesn't, as long as you're doing the movement. And then once we get to that point, we can start loading as long as he's, ready for it. So even with my youngest kid, he could dumbbell squat like a champ, holding the dumbbell here, goblet squat or whatever. With the barbell, he had trouble. So we spent 6 months just literally doing a lot of prowler work and a lot of dumbbell squat work, just tons of it. And he got so, eventually we put the bar on his back. It was easy. It was like night and day difference. So when I say bar on your back, it's a training bar. He doesn't go very heavy. He just, kicking butt on the squat. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that perspective.
So don't be tied down. Especially if you're not competing in powerlifting, it doesn't really matter that much as long as you try to do it. In my estimation, you try to do it in the biggest range of motion that's possible, that you can do healthy. We've had kids with some hip issues or some back issues that they had to squat on a little higher box. Fine. I don't really care. We're going to do it like that. So, but yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, I think, in terms of not getting married to one setup, where I think that a lot of it comes down to nuances with people's body proportions and like limb lengths and that kind of thing. And people will find ultimately that one form of the lift just grooves better for them. And that they just feel stronger and feel good with that. So that's usually what I recommend as well for people.
The other thing you have to understand too is a lot of times, a lot of those lifts don't feel well because they haven't done the general base fitness work. Their assistance work hasn't been done very well. So they're just not strong enough to hold certain positions. So that's where you talked about assistance work. That's where that comes in. That allows your body to actually do the lift correctly. So there you go.
And then, and so I guess just opening the floor up then beyond the main barbell squat, what are your favorite assistance movements for squatting?
So I'll take it on two fronts. I'll take it on the kid front and then what I did. So with the kids, anything that we can do with your legs in general. So we do something for our lower body every single day. For the assist, so we do lunges, a lot of body weight squats, dumbbell squats, prowler, stair sprints or hill sprints, and we've done straight leg deadlifts, but that didn't do very well. We do a lot of glute ham raises, a lot of I don't even know what it's called, the inverted leg curl or Russian leg curl or whatever, where you hold the kid's kneeling down on the ground and you hold his ankles and he kind of comes forward and comes
Nordic
back up.
lowers.
There we go. Yeah, there's been, who knows what it's called. I don't know. So anything that we can just kind of bomb their legs with that allows them to do it at a high volume without any kind of real injury potential. Especially with, this year we had about 60 kids in the weight room, and there's one of me. So a lot of that, like, listen, I have to make sure that the lifts that we choose for the kids, that when I have my back turned, it doesn't turn into a complete shit show. We also have some kids that have weight vests. Like, I'm a huge fan of the weight vest. They'll put that on, and instead of doing body weight squats, they'll have a 20-pound vest and knock some of that stuff out. So anything that kind of smokes the legs, that allows them to go through a full range of motion and conditions the legs to a large degree. We do a ton of jumping. I'm a huge fan of jumping. I think jumping carries over better to lifting than people will ever know, especially if you want to be strong and explosive. It kind of teaches you how to explode real quickly, just like at the bottom of a squat. You don't just ease into it. That has to be a powerful, violent movement. So I think jumping is huge, and we do jumps in the off season 3 days a week. We don't do a ton of volume, maybe 20 to 35 contacts at a time. And we use standing long jumps, bounding drills, obviously box jumps. That's probably the easiest one for people to do. And so that's for the younger kids. We also do a lot of abs. So we do a lot of leg raises. And I do that because I think it's important to have strong hip flexors. So some of the older, stronger kids can do hanging leg raises, when they hang from a bar and lift their legs up, or, lift their knees up. We also do on the ground, some abdominal work. Abdominal work is super important because as we transition into what I did when I got stronger, the most important thing that changed for me, for going from like what you would call a fairly good squat and deadlift to very, very good, at least in my eyes, was a ton of abdominal work and a ton of low back hamstring work, like a good morning or the back raise with I have a 45-degree back raise that I used, and I'd always load it. So I'll put a barbell on my back and just arch up and down, because if you can't take the weight out and completely own it, if you're starting to fold, it doesn't matter how strong your legs are. It does not matter one bit. And I can attest that every guy that I trained with, in powerlifting, they smashed and hammered their abs and low back. I'm sorry, but if you want to get stronger in the squat and deadlift, you are not going to do it just by squatting and deadlifting. The only way that works is if you're completely 100% built for those lifts. So if you, so you see a lot of guys, they'll say, well, so-and-so who squatted 900 or whatever, and he only did squats. Well, that's great, but he probably did something up until then, or he's built to do that lift and he doesn't really need to do that. But if you are struggling, if you're just kind of like a normal person, you're going to have to really touch into that. Now, the third thing that I did was very much what I did with the kids. Was I did at Elite FTS, we had something called what was it called? Oh my God. It was it's kind of like a hack squat machine, but it was facing the other way. It's really different. So it's not exactly, it's called power squat. It was a power squat machine. So if people don't, they have these things in certain gyms, but if you went on Elite FTS's website and you saw the power squat. And so for 2 years, every Monday, I would do the power squat for probably, starting very light all the way up to incredibly heavy sets. I went up to like 1,315 pounds, which was not really 1,000, because it's a machine. And I just bombed the shit out of my legs. I mean, I got my legs as strong and as conditioned as possible. So every Monday I would do the power squat. I would do a ton of incredibly heavy ab work. And I would do the 45-degree back raise until like my eyes bulge out of my head. And so it was pretty much hamstrings, low back, abs, and just get as strong legs as possible. And if you don't have access to a power squat, which most people don't, but something as simple as a leg press will work. And you don't have to necessarily go super heavy. You just need to do you need to build your legs so much that you're basically building the quads and ass of armor. just big, as strong as possible. And that's usually when I first started doing it, I would do sets of 10 all the way up. So I might do 20 sets of 10. Now the first 8 sets were pretty easy, but that starts building up and building up and building up and building up. And over time, like my legs got really, really, really strong. And the benefit of like a leg press or a power squat is I never had to think about the form. It was what I call like a Neanderthal lift. Like the leg press, all you got to do is push. Like you don't have to lock in just like a squat or a deadlift where everything needs to be kind of perfect. It's just kind of a dumb lift. So now obviously I don't really consider like the front squat or a safety squat bar an assistance lift. That's more of a supplemental lift, or be used as a main lift. But if you're kind of stuck in it, at a certain point, if you've gotten your squat, way past the 2 times body weight, those are some things you may need to address. But yeah, I would say it's at the beginning, you need to develop just basic leg condition and strength with some abdominal work. And then as you start to get farther away and get stronger, you need to really kind of hone in on the stuff that it's when you start to get really strong, the mental side of the game comes more into play than ever before. And I think one of the things is when you have an incredibly strong midsection and you take off 900 pounds, it shouldn't feel like anything on your back. And so I think that's a huge thing for a more experienced, stronger lifter. So there you go.
Yeah, no, that's really cool to hear. And I think that's kind of it's a little bit a product of our social media generation, I think, where people, now that they have access to like quick information like this, it's so easy for them to just access these, elites and see like, oh, this guy, all he does is the competition squat year round. And, he only does a few sets. So that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Like one of the things that I still do today is I put a weight vest on and I will climb stairs for an hour. And we have a stadium over, at the high school, the football stadium, and I'll just go up and down. I'll skip a step, every step. So it's like doing an explosive step up, and it works wonders. I mean, if you put on, especially once you get past like the 50, 60 pound vest, if you're doing that and maybe I think I worked up to, I have to do the math in my head. I don't know, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 steps in a workout, with the vest on going up and down. My legs were and my ass were fucking huge. Like it was, and you get a really good conditioning component in there too. So it kind of kills 2 birds with 1 stone. And obviously if you're wearing the weight vest, you get a tremendous amount of core work and your traps are burning to hell. So I don't think sometimes the answer lies in going back a little bit for some people that maybe don't have that fitness background. They just need to get in better overall, what I call like ass kicking shape. That stuff that makes you an ass kicker. Having that kind of strength and conditioning up to a certain point where you're not just focused on doing everything like clinically in a weight room, where you need to go out and actually get some like, I don't know if you call it real world or whatever, but I think it helps greatly. I see it all the time in our kids, especially with very weak, obese kids. Like they just need to get that dumb strength going and that conditioning. So there you go.
And then what are your thoughts on some of the other machines like the hack squat and Smith machines?
I never used a Smith machine, so I can't really talk about that. But anything that you can do that kind of removes the thought process, I think is a good thing. Now, I've done hack squats before and I trained the shit out of my legs. I don't know how much it actually transferred to the squat. So I even the leg press for me never really transferred that much, but I know a lot of guys that did, especially with the deadlift, it seemed to help more on the deadlift. But the general thing is, if you don't have muscular legs, you got to do stuff. I mean, you got to do something, and you need to address it with the same amount of ferocity that you would address other lifts. And I see, and I was guilty of this too for a little bit, that I didn't apply that same kind of, you don't have to hit an ammonia cap before you do your hack squats. But if you want to get better, you're going to have to push harder. That's just, I mean, I think people kind of lose that sometimes. That doesn't mean that every workout's going to be a, gold medal day. But like we have one of our, I don't know what you call it, like one of our badges of honor for freshmen football players is they have to dumbbell squat a 50-pound dumbbell for 50 straight reps. And it's become kind of a badge of honor. And we have, I am a huge fan of the dumbbell squat. It's very easy for the kids to do it, meaning like their technique is really solid. Number two, if you do it for a long period of time, you'll be surprised how big your arms and traps get because you're holding a heavy dumbbell here. It allows for most kids have a much better range of motion because the weight is not as heavier, so they're not like cutting their squats. And we had, I think, 7 kids be able to do the 150-pound dumbbell for sets of 20 to 30 reps on it. And just the sheer brute strength of picking that dumbbell up, because no one can hand you the dumbbell. You can't like set it up on a high bench and kind of get under it. You have to, if you can't pick it up, you can't do it. That's part of the thing. So and I was never a big fan of the dumbbell squat because I was so entrenched in like, I lifted with guys that if you didn't bench 600, you were being made fun of. I mean, that's a weird world to be stuck in. And then I go to a high school gym and I'm like, holy shit, like this is a whole other, it is so far beyond what I was used to. And and the kids were very untrained that, I'm like, well, shit, what do we do? And I gave it a shot and I couldn't believe how the success that we had for a younger lifter. So generally we try to do, it's half your body weight for 20 reps. That's generally like, if you can get there, you're going to be okay. It doesn't mean that's where you stop, but so if you're a 200-pound guy, 100-pound dumbbell for 20 straight great reps on the front squat, the dumbbell squat. So there you go. So I'm going to tell you this, listen, the need for basic physical brute dumbness needs to be addressed. It really does. Like we have our standard is 50. Everyone should be able to do 50 push-ups. And you're like, holy shit, 50 push-ups is nothing. That's like the first 5 minutes of basic training. And if you're expecting to get stronger and you can't do a push-up or you can't do chin-ups or you can't do dips, like I love dips. That's like a dumb exercise too. And so sometimes I think people want to specialize way too much that like, listen, let's just address the push-up problem. If you want to get a bigger bench and you can only do 2 push-ups, well, now we know what we can do to get you better.
Yeah,
so, there you go.
That makes sense. And yeah, we'll be getting to the bench stuff soon. I wanted to talk about deadlift next, I guess, since we're on the topic of legs. So maybe starting off just with your thoughts on the squat. I mean, the sumo versus conventional, the age-old question.
Oh. It's funny because this was never like an issue when I was powerlifting. At least I didn't think it was. And then I don't really go on social media or anything, but I saw some guy at a meet who had a crazy deadlift. It was like 900 something. And it was a sumo deadlift, and everyone was kind of pissing him on, and I couldn't wrap my head around. I'm like, well, he did it within the rules. That's like saying this touchdown's different than this touchdown. Well, he ran harder. He just caught a little pass, and there was no one on him. So what does that count to say? So I think that's just people finding something to bitch and moan about, or everyone wants to kind of take a side on some of that stuff. But let me tell you something. Let's just say sumo, conventional, or trap bar. Okay, the trap bar. We do a ton of trap bar work at the high school here. And they'll say, well, that's not a real deadlift. I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's not a real deadlift. But if someone deadlifts trap bars, conventionals, or sumos 900 pounds, you're a strong dude. I don't care how you don't have to qualify it. If you're picking 900 pounds off from the floor, you're going to be okay. So I don't really think it matters. So with the assistance on the deadlift, I did all my pulling conventional, and I always have. And I farted around with sumo, but my hips are so tight, like I couldn't even get my legs out. Like it would be, it ended up being like a weird straight leg deadlift all rounded over, like a candy cane. So, but, and I got this from Louis Simmons, is a lot of the same ideas from the squat transfer to deadlift. You said this earlier. But with the deadlift, for most people, especially if you're pulling conventional, you need to have a super strong back. Now, if you watch like really strong deadlifters deadlift, very few are like perfect arch back. They have a little roundness in their back. Okay, they're not like crapped over. But the key is when you're deadlifting is when I raise up, that back shouldn't change.
Okay.
Meaning, as soon as I lift the bar up, it shouldn't do this. Like their ass shouldn't come up. If you're able to maintain that static position, you should be okay. Okay. And let's just be honest. If you're powerlifting, if you're trying to, deadlift 1,000,000 pounds, the last thing on your mind is your health. Let's just be honest. So, but with that, the number one thing I ever did was I addressed my abdominals and low back, because if I couldn't maintain that great body position, that it didn't matter how strong my legs were. It did not matter one bit. So those two things, and when I say low back stuff, for me, the good morning was huge. You don't have to go super heavy, but I think a good range of motion on the good morning helps. The back raise, or the 45-degree back raise, which is basically like a good morning. I call it the good morning without politics, because you can't really cheat. And when you use the back raise or the 45-degree back raise, you can't really cheat, and you don't use the same load, and that will help save you a little bit. So when I was fairly strong, I did usually 5 to 8 sets of the 45-degree back raise. I'd start with the bar for a couple sets of 10, then I put 95 pounds on, then I put 135 on, and you're essentially doing a super strict good morning. And I squeeze the shit out of my glutes at the top and all that stuff, and the glute ham raises would be huge, even with the squat too. And then the third thing, and this was the final thing that really drove my deadlift high, was high rep dumbbell rows, aka croc rows, named after Krasluski, Matt. And I always I could lift any weight to about my mid thigh, any weight, within reason, but I could never lock anything out. I had a horrible time with lockout, and I had nerve damage in my shoulder that affected my grip. Okay. So when I started doing the high rep dumbbell rows, that fixed my lockout at the top and fixed my grip issues. Okay. So and I couldn't believe it, because it's it's an upper body movement. What the hell? So here's what happened. And this is, when I started doing those, remember my left hand, I had no feeling in these two fingers at the time. So I had a horrible time. So I did a test, and I did the 150-pound dumbbell row for 6 reps with my bad arm. That's all I could hold. Horrible. So for like 2 months, all I did was, every time I did any kind of, I did it on my bench day too, because it's great for your bench. Terrific for your bench, because you have to, your upper back and holding that position, especially when you're benching raw, super important. But my grip became like ironclad. So about 8 weeks later, maybe 12 weeks later or something like that, I tested again. All I did was like rows and chin-ups, rows and chin-ups, rows and chin-ups. I did 150-pound dumbbell for like 28 reps per arm. I did a 200-pound dumbbell for 6 reps with no straps. Okay. So it got to a point where my grip was no longer an issue. I had an ironclad grip, because you try rowing a 150-pound dumbbell for 30 reps or so, dude, your hands, feel like you can choke. You could take out like someone's trachea. And so when I started doing that, I never had an issue locking out ever again. It became it completely wiped it away. And then, so I started doing both, what I call like high rep dumbbell rows without straps and with straps. Now these kind of, sometimes they're not like the, picture perfect rows. You're just kind of I call it grunt fucking the weight up. You're just rowing like you actually want to kill someone. And I ended up getting, going up to like a 230-pound dumbbell for 25 reps with straps. And people can, and I would too, I would see that and be like, well, are you really doing anything? And then you go deadlift and you're like, oh my God, am I so much stronger? So I think in my estimation, for the bench and the deadlift, that the dumbbell row is a huge thing. So what I did was I came up with some standards, and it became the bare minimum would be half your body weight. So again, if you're a 200-pound man, half your body weight for 20 reps. Intermediate would be 35, and advanced would be 50. And when I issued this, especially on my forum, people were like, "Oh, you're nuts." And then some of the old guys like, "Well, dude, I'm telling you, it makes a difference." And you wait till you see if your grip ever has any issues, or if you have any problems locking out, or when you bench, if you can't ride on your upper back and support that weight perfectly, if you take it out and kind of sink, your upper back is not strong and thick enough. You talk about how important hypertrophy is. One of the greatest bench pressers I've ever seen in my life was George Halbert. And he benched, from 198 all the way up to 275 class. Well, George, and this was in probably 2000, he benched 683 at 198, which is at the time was such a colossal jump from what everyone else. So this was probably, I don't know, maybe 6 months after he did that. I met George Halbert at my first powerlifting meet. And so I saw George head on, and he was a definitely strong, muscular dude. George turns to the side, and his back and chest were comically large. Yeah. It was like a caricature. And I was like, oh my God. And so I understood, Louis always preached upper back, upper back, upper back. And then you see it in person. You're like, oh, that's, I'm nowhere where I need to be. So I think those three things, the abdominals, lower back, and rows, will help just about anyone. And then obviously any kind of dumb leg stuff really, really helps, because you need to drive off the floor with incredible amount of, you have to ease the bar off. We call it taking the slack off the bar. But once you get that slack out of the bar, you have to accelerate. And if your abs and low back aren't strong enough to handle that acceleration, that power, then you're just going to fold over and you're never going to lock out the weight. So there you go. Pretty simple as far as I'm concerned. So again, if you were going to really break it down for like the average guy, I think the abs and low back would be huge. And then you have the dumbbell squat, minimum half body weight for 20, and the dumbbell row. I think those things would help just about everyone. So, and to be completely honest, when I started understanding this, everything kind of changed. When I'm like, listen, the main lifts are super important, right? They're like the meat. When you're making a stew, that's like the meat. But you need those other things too. And I think people need to kind of push those a little harder if they want their squat, bench, deadlift to go up. So, and no one ever got smaller legs by doing, high rep leg press or picking up a 150-pound dumbbell and knocking out 100 reps over a workout. It's like no one's ever going to get weaker, so there you go.
Yeah, that's the thing we're learning about, hypertrophy now, how seeing the science catch up with things where you can really build muscle in a really wide range of reps. And, you know, I totally see the value in going for the high reps. It takes a lot of grit, though.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing is, and I saw this with the kids I work with and the guys I train with, was I think a lot of that stuff, like you said, builds grit. I think it builds an attitude, a fierceness that you need to handle big weights. Now, not everyone probably needs this, but if you want to get stronger and really you got to, start pushing past what you think is normal. Your attitude needs to be such that you're willing to fight. And a lot of that stuff, I think, builds that fight. You have to learn how to be incredibly uncomfortable. You have to go into that dark part in your head. And I think that's super important for just about anyone. It helps build a tremendous character and resolve too. That's one of the reasons why, like me personally, I had to change my training because I could no longer lift very heavy. So I wasn't developing the insanity that I need. Does that make sense? Like I need to push. Mm-hmm. And so when I started doing some different stuff, I learned, okay, I can still have that same attitude. I just have to apply it differently. And as soon as you do that, I think every part of your life ends up changing if you can learn to apply it. So super important, I think. So there you go.
And in terms of some of the more conventional, like, just standard barbell type movements like deficit deadlifts, snatch grip deadlifts, and RDLs, what are your thoughts on those?
I think they're good, but I would not replace the main lift with those. I would do that as what we call supplemental work. So as an example, the main lift goes first. The second exercise would be, or supplemental would be, deficit deadlifts. Rack pulls are a huge thing. Everyone loves rack pulls, right? It's like, because you can lift a ton of weight and feel like you're doing something. Snatch grip deads are tremendous, especially great for building speed off the ground, because you're in a deeper position. It helps build some strength. Even if you stood on a fairly small elevated platform, the trap bar deadlift can really help out. So I think those things are tremendous. I just don't know if everyone needs them right away. So now that doesn't mean you can't use them occasionally, but I think sometimes specialization, like if you can't do, a dumbbell squat with X amount of weight, I don't know, or you can't do back raises perfectly for 50 reps. Do you really need deficit deadlifts right now? Or maybe you should address the small little issues that are probably really holding you back. So there you go.
And then moving on to the bench press, you've already talked a little bit about some of the upper body work, but your favorite accessories?
So I've always been horrible. That's like my worst lift. By far my worst lift. And I think a lot of it has to do with, I never really benched much or did any upper body work for about the first 5 years of training. Everything was revolved around squatting, hills, jumping, cleans, squatting, hills. So it was all about lower body strength and speed and power. So I've always had to play catch up. And towards the end of my college football career, I started getting a little more specialized in upper body stuff. And so here's the things that I thought made a huge difference. Is the biggest difference I did was I started pressing overhead. My shoulders were insanely weak. So I started pressing I did bench stuff on Sundays and Wednesdays. So on Sundays, I would do like a main movement, and then I would just bomb the shit out of my shoulders with the press. And I'm talking, they were weak. I mean, horrible weak. I did weights I wouldn't even tell you. That's why I did them by myself in an empty gym. I didn't wake up early. It was bad. So to put this in perspective, I was able to bench about 400 pounds, and I couldn't press 135 over my head. That's how. Now, a lot of it, I had shoulder injuries, and I took a tremendous amount of pounding on my shoulders. I had impingement issues, but I just couldn't press. Even when I was healthy, I couldn't do it. So this was in January of 2000. And so in March, my couple friends and I did a bench press competition. It wasn't a meet, but we just said, let's just train for something. So I did nothing but overhead press on Sundays, or I did chain push-ups. I'm talking about, like they call them ring push-ups or TRX push-ups. We didn't have that cool stuff. We just made our own. I did presses, chain push-ups, and I always did them with like a heavy band, or not heavy, an average band around my neck. So I'd have to learn how to accelerate to lockout. Always doing about 50 to 100 total reps every workout. And I would do some dumbbell incline stuff or dumbbell pressing on Wednesdays. Okay. So I went from a 400 shitty pound bench to a 440 in March. The next month I benched 455. So it was like one of those things, like it was like I found the Holy Grail. Now I don't know if everyone's Holy Grail is going to be that, but there's going to be something. So I think any kind of full range movement other than the bench press is going to help. And for a lot of people, that would be the dumbbell work. Now, here's the other thing is most people, because of the strength curve, fail at the bottom. Like they can maybe generate a little power out of the bottom because of the stretch reflex, and they don't get it anywhere. So when I would do the presses, when I would do the push-ups, when I do all the dumbbell work, I did it with the purpose of driving off my chest. So for example, when I would do the push-ups, I'd go down, I'd hold that static position, hold, and then fire as hard as I could, lock it out, hold, down. With the dumbbell presses, I would bring down. I wouldn't just do this. I'd bring it down, learn how to fire everything all at once. With the presses, I would keep it here, down position, and then fire it up, lock it out overhead, bring it down. So I did everything with incredible amount of purpose. Every rep was done as if I was benching 500 pounds. I always picture it because I think 500 was like the greatest number in the world at that time. So everything was kind of focused on that. Because, everyone talks about the lockout on the bench. The problem is it doesn't matter how much you lock out if you can't get there in the first place. It's like driving a ball off a tee. Everyone says, how important putting is. Well, that's great, but if I can never get to the green, it doesn't matter how good at putting I'm in. It takes me 40 shots to get there. Great, now it's 41. I sunk a 20-footer, so big deal. So I think that hammering the shoulders and chest with not really, I don't think flies really help. I mean, that maybe for shaping, but no one ever got a bigger bench by doing, flies with the, I don't know. So handle some weights. I also pushed the reps on there, but the more important thing was each rep was done with an incredible amount of purpose. Even like, for example, when I would do the back raises, I'd go down and I kind of feel myself tense up. I'd slow down and then I would gather momentum and hold at the top when I was doing the back raises, just like when you deadlift, right? You can't just jerk the bar off the floor when you deadlift. So having that kind of focus when you're doing the assistant flips, I think is super important. Even with like the dumbbell squat, you have to hold. I want our kids to hold at the top and not arch back. So they build a tremendous amount of tension in their body. And when they want them to control on the way down. And when they drive up hard. I want that. I don't just want reps. I want explosive, meaningful reps. So again, you can hem and haw a little bit about what exercises do, but I think what's really important too is having, again, we talk about building grit, having that attitude when you do something. I think that carries over more than people think too.
Yeah, that's a really well said, where you really want to have that intention behind your all of your lifts, as you said, not just finishing your barbell squat and being like, okay, I'm done for the day, I'm not going to actually try as hard with this other stuff.
So I just and I think once people know what their goals are, then I think you're able to kind of ascertain how you're going to go about it. If you're just kind of going in there to do something, that's fine. But when you start having true purpose and true intent, everything starts to change. And I've seen it happen with, it usually happens junior year with our kids when they understand how to train and what's expected of them. Everything, like their entire lives change, their bodies change, their attitude changes, because now they understand what they're doing is for a purpose, and they're doing it with that attitude. And I can't say enough about that. So.
And then what are your thoughts on?
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no, the mindset is key. What do you think about some of the partial range pressing, like floor presses, pin presses, board presses?
Well, I like doing the floor presses. I think I got a lot out of floor presses. Again, but I was already a fairly strong lifter at this time.
Got it.
We did a ton of board pressing too. The problem is I got good at board pressing because I learned how to board press better. Once I stopped learning how to board press better and had intent to the board press, I don't know if this is going to make sense, then I got better at it. So then I got stronger bench. Okay. So as an example, if you ever see like a 2 or 3 board press, there's a way you can cheat. You can kind of bring the barbell into the board, kind of sink, and then launch it off the board. Okay. All right. So I learned how to do that. The floor press, you can't really do that. But anyway, with board pressing, I learned how. That's because your goal is to lift as much weight as possible. So you're just like, I'll find my ways around it. And so what ended up happening is I got really good at board press. I think I had a raw board press, like a 2-3 board. I think I did 585 with a close grip.
Crazy.
And, but I don't think that transferred very well. So what I started doing was I would bring the the barbell down, and I would just barely touch the board and then try to grind it up. And boy, you talk about getting your ego slammed. That's very, very difficult to do because you have to kind of stop midway. You're kind of isometrically holding, then you got to grind the weight up. You have no momentum. Now with the board or with the floor press, you can't really I hope to God you don't try to bounce your elbows off the ground. But we did I love the floor press. And because I was a fairly explosive lifter, the one thing was we would drape the heavy chains over the barbell. So every set was done with, I think, 2 chains per side, so that I don't know how much that is. It's 44 extra pounds. And so when you'd come down, obviously the chains deload a little bit, and you have to press incredibly fast to outrun those chains. If you're just doing it all slow, those chains are just going to bog you down. So I thought the floor press helped me tremendously, again, with intent, because you have to bring the bar down. And when I was really big, that bar touched my chest, or was like a quarter inch away. So, obviously I was much, much heavier, and I had a bigger back and bigger chest, and let's just face it, a bigger stomach. So, but again, I think when I did that with intent, I think that really, really helped me. Again, it's treated just like the deficit deadlift. You're more than welcome to do it. I don't know if I would replace the bench or the press with those things, but as a supplemental movement, I think they can have merit. But again, if you can't do 50 push-ups, you really think like doing a 2-board press with 85 pounds is going to help you? Like you gotta kind of understand where this all fits in. Like the kids I work with, we never do any of that stuff, and they just haven't earned the right to do them yet, and plus, they're young kids. So if you're older, more experienced lifter, you may have to tap into that stuff, but I don't think a lot of people really need it. So, but when I was much stronger, like we had to use some variations. We do a lot of add some bands or chains to the bar. What else did we do? The Swiss bar, the cambered bar, stuff like that. At the end of the day, you're still just pressing. It's not terribly complicated. So, again, purpose makes a huge difference when you really want to increase your strength. So.
Yeah, I like how you really come into these accessories with an intelligent idea of how you want to transfer, right? Where you're talking about the board press and how you can basically turn it into a different lift if you wanted to, right? By like kind of torquing your shoulders or like twisting things around a little bit. Where if you want to get stronger, you really want to think about how to transfer it, like really thinking about explosion off the bottom, and pressing and such.
Now, the one thing that I can't expect a 15-year-old kid to understand this stuff. So the only thing that we teach is control on the way down. We want I want you to be in control of that barbell, not the other way around. Control and then power on the way up. Control on the way up, but I want power. So I want them to learn how to push, with intention. So if you're not, I wouldn't expect them to understand how to floor press, like, how to translate that. So, again, if you're kind of beginner, that's all we're looking for is control. You should always be in control of the barbell, the dumbbell. If not, the weight's probably too heavy. It's funny because it's when someone sends me a video of them like squatting and it's like, just an absolute clusterfuck. And I said, well, does this look like, is this how 95 pounds looks like? Like, well, no. Like, well, magically, if you use the correct weight, your form gets better. So you have to use the appropriate weight for whatever your body can handle. And as long as we're doing the reps correctly and we're building the assistance, over time, you're going to be able to handle 300 pounds just like you did 95 pounds. So a lot of the issues that I see are simply like a loading problem. They're just putting too much weight on there. And it's funny because people are like, your scapula's not retracted and this and that. I'm like, well, he doesn't have that issue with a lighter weight. So why don't we focus on doing the things correctly and let the strength build over a period of time rather than trying to load and trying to nitpick the little stuff. Because let's face it, on a maximal attempt, nothing's ever perfect. It's, it's just not going to happen. So anyway. So like even with my youngest kid, we never load very heavy. We just load, we do the same weight along for weeks. We do the same weight over and over again. And then he kind of like hits like a monumental, what do I say? How do I say this? So we'll just keep on pounding like, you know, a 40-pound deadlift over and over again. And if I went up to 55, everything goes to shit. So we just do 40 and we do 40, we do 10 sets of 5 or whatever it is. And then 6 months later, he's able to do, and we finally put 65 pounds on there, and now he's able to do that perfectly. So the goal isn't always to do more weight every workout. It's to do the weight correctly with intention. And over time, that builds up. So don't get caught up in the fact like, I got to do 5 more pounds. You know, I did 65 pounds today. Next week it's 70. Your body doesn't work like that. It needs to accumulate the volume and accumulate the work and doing it correctly. So,
yeah. That's great. Yeah, a few things to unpack there. Like in terms of, you know, coming back to what you were saying about the assistance work, where like the way I see it is no one ever won a medal for, you know, Romanian deadlifts or board presses or, you know, like leg presses and not trying to tie your ego to the weight.
No, but what ends up happening if like I've seen this happen way too many times. We did this past year with the trap bar. We changed some of the programming and we trained much lighter, and the kids were like, but after like 6 weeks, we moved up a little bit, and now they were smoking weights that they couldn't even imagine. And so the training was always with, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I screamed the same things over and over again. And all of a sudden their bar speed starts increasing and their power and their control. And this was not like an uncommon thing. We had a kid who did most of his weights. His prior best deadlift was maybe 275 for 2. We did started with 195, you know, and then we eventually for 6 weeks went up to 225 or so. And I always made sure the reps were solid. So this happened over a course of, let's say, 8 months. He ended up doing 4 sets of 5 and a 5th set of 15 with 315 every 2 minutes. He did a set. That's insane amount of strength gains over it. Now, but we started by building that base of doing correct reps with intention. Don't be afraid to do things right with the correct weight. It'll get you there faster. Now, if I told you like you could increase your deadlift that much, you're like, hell yeah. And like, well, do you really want to do the work? Because a lot of it sucks, you know? So it's just, and the kid weighed 165 pounds. That's insane. He's a sophomore this year.
Yeah, and that's a really good point as well. What you were saying about how you don't always need to be increasing the weight every workout, where, you know, if you're lifting with diamond cut technique and really good intent, you can still accumulate a lot of stimulus, even though on paper the workout might look basically the same. And it can lead to, you know, really, really having breakthroughs in performance.
Like our big thing was, like I said, I wanted, oh my God, it drives me nuts. I want the kids to lift with aggression, controlled, calm aggression, just aggression. And obviously that carries over to the football field, but your reps end up getting better and better. And like I always say, like whenever you lift that bar off, you're driving someone off the ball. Drive someone off the ball, you know. So anyway, I just super proud of some of these kids, the way they worked and the way they, you know, it's an ego, because young kids, I mean, happens with us too, older guys, they get their self-esteem gets tied to how much they lift, where I want their self-esteem to be tied to how good they do the lift. And I got this from a calisthenics guy. He always says, you know, your reps are your reputation. Are you doing them with the correct integrity and character? And again, that doesn't mean just kind of doing this. It means everything is with intent. Everything is with power. So there you go. I say there you go all the time, so I apologize.
Oh, good. And then, circling back to a little bit of the back work. I know you talk quite a bit about, you know, the importance of of having a strong upper back. Are there any other exercises that you would also add to the list? You know, you talked about demo rows, bent rows. Yeah.
So like we do a ton of, we do chin-ups every single day. We start off our workout with chin-ups and some other kind of body weight movement. And again, this is athletics that I'm coaching, but I still think it's important that everyone just have the ability to do pull-ups and chin-ups. Just like I think it's important for young kids to be able to run a mile. And it's not because they're going to go run a mile. I think it's just important to have that kind of physical fitness, that general base of just aerobic fitness. But with upper back work, we do a lot of rear raises. So we lay on an incline, 45-degree incline bench, and we just, out to the sides. We do those for super, super high reps. No set is ever done for less than 15 reps. We obviously we don't have, if we could, we would do a lot of face pulls, but we don't have any cable stations. I think face pulls, again, just don't do 10 reps. Put on a weight that's challenging, that doesn't obviously make you fall forward, that allows you to do it with great weight. Start doing sets of 20, 30, and 40. You need to really, so all this is like the little stuff. This is like the garnishes, like what's that? Hey babe, what's that green stuff? Parsley. It's the parsley on it still matters, right? The parsley still matters when you're presenting. So for example, we do a lot of dumbbell incline rowing where you lay on the bench. That way it takes kind of the lower back out of it. But the little stuff, the parsley is the face pulls, the band pull aparts, is the rear raises. We also do something where we hold a plate out in front of us and we do a plate raise, but we go all the way over our head and we end it with our scapula and upper back completely contracted up top. It smokes your traps and your shoulders. So I think a lot of that stuff is great for shoulder health. It helped me quite a bit in the past. But if just general, like if you can't do chin-ups, like you need to address that issue, because I always say there's 3 reasons why you can't do a pull-up or a chin-up. Hold on one second. Hold on one second here. It's you're fat, you're overweight, you're weak, or you're hurt. Okay, so I think you need to address that issue. It's the same thing with push-ups. Can you do the push-ups? So to give you an we train 3 days a week. We do chin-ups every single day as part of our warm-up. And we had 2 300-pound kids be able to do 1 chin-up with like a band assisted pull-ups. Now they're able to do sets of 10 with their body weight. Now that's an incredible, and I have nothing to do with it. That's just them working their asses off. So, but with our pull-ups and chin-ups, I use those terms interchangeably because anything you get your chin over the bar. So we vary our grips quite a bit. Okay. We do a lot of underhand, pronated. We have a neutral grip, variety of neutral grip, and then the kids start making up weird grips because I want them to be good at anything. Me personally, I do I do at least 100 pull-ups every single day, and I also do rope pull-ups or towel chin-ups where you're holding on to something. Again, great for your grip, great for your forearms, stuff like that. So you can never, a lot of people say like chin-ups aren't great for your back. And I'm like, I don't do them just for the muscular back. We do them because that's a physical movement you should be able to do as a human. Just like squatting up and down. You'd be surprised. We have young kids, 6th and 7th and 8th graders who can't do a body weight squat. That's not acceptable in this world. It's really not. And same thing. So where am I going with this? So as long as you're doing, especially for maybe an overweight guy, you need to really smoke the rows and the lat pulls. And if you can, get a band assisted chin up or something like that. So get yourself, how do I put this? If you get there, things will happen. Okay. There's no negatives of an overweight guy leaning out, being able to do chin-ups. It's not like, I got cancer. Why? I did chin-ups. Like no one's ever gotten weaker by doing that stuff. So, and the other thing is if you have that ability now, do not lose it. So that's, if you're an older guy and you can do chin-ups, it doesn't mean you have to do them all the time, but make sure you keep that in your training so you're always able to do it. You'll thank me in like 30 years when you're still 7 years old knocking out chin-ups. So. Yeah,
I think that, people kind of, it's It's funny how you see this like lopsided approach to lifting where everyone puts their egos on the bench, and pressing movements, whereas pulling and back work gets thrown under the wayside. And the way I see it is, you have to approach your upper back training with as much priority and as much, purpose as you're pressing. Like I program my weighted chin-ups and my rowing movements like a main movement, right? Like, and I got to the point where I was doing, weighted chin-ups with like 3 plates hanging from my waist.
Wow, that's 35 really good.
For sets of 5, and really going into it with the intent of getting stronger. And like you see these people, like you see a dude who's benching, I don't know, like 275 or something, and then they're doing dumbbell rows with like 60-pound dumbbells, and it's like something's not right here.
Well, it's going to catch up at some point. It always does. But there's a great video, and anyone watching this can access it. It's on YouTube. A guy went and trained with the Norwegian long-range reconnaissance team. It's a special forces team out of Norway. And their testing was a med ball throw, a seal row, which is you're on an elevated flat bench and you row a barbell up to the bottom of the bench. Does that make sense? So it's like a chest supported row that's flat, a weighted chin up, and probably one of the most insane conditioning tests I've ever seen in my entire life. And I looked at these guys. These guys are literally they're warriors, but their physical fitness is crazy. And if they've deemed those 2 back movements to be assessments to these absolute insane physical beasts, then you should probably do something like that too. That doesn't mean you have to, become a Norwegian long-range sniper. It means that they are important. So tremendous video. I can't remember the exact thing, but it is unbelievable, especially when you watch their conditioning test. It makes, if you've ever pushed yourself in like a real conditioning sense, like to the point where you feel like you're shitting yourself, you'll watch that video and all those emotions will come back. It's like drinking too much tequila, throwing up, and then like 6 months later you take a shot at tequila and you just feel like, oh, this is done. I'm done. I can see it all. I can taste the burrito. So yeah, it's super important. And the one thing that we do with our kids, and I don't know if this is going to help anyone, but maybe it does, is with our lower bodies, we call it, we want to athlete our lower bodies and we want to bodybuild our upper bodies. So when I say athlete our lower, we're always looking for power and speed and power and speed, it's over and over again. With our upper body, we just want to build some muscle mass, because it's been my experience, along with millions of other people, that when they're trying to increase their bench or whatever they're doing, if you don't have that muscle mass, it takes time. They need that muscle mass to get stronger. So that's always the kind of my warrior call. So we call it bodybuild the upper, athlete the lower. So.
Yeah. And then there's one last thing I want to touch on was pause work. What are your thoughts on the use of that for your big lifts?
If you think it will help you, if you mentally think that's what's holding you back, I think it's great. I think it's super smart for, not so much for a beginner, because I don't think I don't think it's necessary. But if you're to the intermediate, and maybe you need to learn how to focus on exploding and gathering that energy. I know it sounds really weird, but that's how I learned how to lift, was understanding that everything I do has to go into the bar. I can't have any wasted motion. I can't have any wasted movement. Those can help. I think that will help you, especially if you don't have like an athletic background where you've been forced to explode. I think that can make a difference, but millions of guys have gotten super strong without it. So I don't know if it's technically not terribly necessary, but for a short amount of time, I think it can be. I think the other thing is I would use that as a supplemental lift. So for example, let's say you bench press, work up whatever sets you got. We'll lower the weight to around 70% or so of your training max. And we don't go to failure. We just go sets of 3 to 5, and it's, controlled pause. The other thing is when you do the pauses, and let's say you want to do a 3-second pause, you should have your training partner count 3 seconds. It's not 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Because everyone seems to count very quickly. A good 3-second. Like I've seen people talk about like, we're doing a 5-second eccentric, and I actually timed them. Like, dude, that was a minute and like 1.5 seconds. Because it's always like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so if you're going to do it, just try to be honest, try to make it, how do I put it? Make sure it's appropriate for your level. A lot of people don't have the muscular strength and conditioning, especially in their upper back, abs and lower back, to hold those bottom positions without getting hurt. So I think that needs to be addressed too. So again, don't do something unless you're ready for it. And it's always best to keep a couple things in your toolbox, so when you really need them, you can break them out.
Yeah, I think that's kind of been a theme to this talk, and I think this would be good to wrap up on, where, with a lot of these specialized accessory movements, you really want to like know what you're doing if you're actually going to be implementing them, right? Where you don't just read it off like some Google article and you're just like, oh yeah, I'm going to do deficit deadlifts now.
Yeah, and I think I have had more people tell me that deficit deadlifts did not help their pull off the bottom because their body position changes so greatly. That doesn't mean it can't help you, but maybe that is not what you really need. So I don't know. I think a lot of times people put a little too much stock in some of that stuff before they need to. And but it's crazy because they see their heroes do it. He's deadlifting 800 pounds. Well, he does them. Like, you deadlift 225, dude. And you're wearing straps. So let's just calm down a little bit, buddy.
Yeah. The game changes very much when you get to different levels.
Oh, it's someone asked me something about this today, and I'm like, I didn't realize how big of a mental game some of this stuff is when you get to a certain level. And that doesn't mean obviously that you obviously have to train incredibly hard, but that training becomes very difficult when you get very strong, because let's say, for example, you're a 200-pound bench presser and you benching like 185, which is what, 90 some odd percent. Okay. It's much different than a 900-pound squatter squatting, what is that, 810?
Yeah.
No, or whatever it is. It's a big difference. Like, there is a real massive difference, even though the percentages technically line up. And even those guys, when they're working up to, let's say, 800 pounds, when you're at 400 or 500 pounds, you can't just take it off and all willy-nilly. Everything has to be perfect. You get really hurt. And obviously the other big thing is, I don't think people understand this either. Just like in bodybuilding, when you see those guys' pictures and they're all shredded, they look like that for like 6 hours. Like, they're not walking around like that, like every day. And just like when you see a guy deadlift 1,000 pounds, he's able to do 1,000 pounds at that moment. He's not, 3 months before the meet, he's not deadlifting 1,000 pounds. It doesn't work like that. You can't. The higher you are, the harder it is to maintain that level. So that's why a lot of times younger lifters can lift pretty hard and pretty close to their max day in and day out, where the average lifter can't do that. They're just not. It's not. If you can, man, you're one of a kind. Oh, here we go. I'm at 10% right now on my phone. I apologize.
Oh yeah. Time to wrap up, but yeah, it's always great to hear your perspectives on things, and you've had so much experience, and I think a lot of people will benefit from this.
Well, I hope so. I'm really I've got that point in my life where I really want to give back. I think working with the kids has done best thing I ever did with my life, was because my high school was where I learned a lot of this stuff, and I think it's important. So if you are an older guy, and you have a chance, it doesn't have to be lifting, it can be anything. Please try to give back. In service, you will find it'll reward you greatly when you're in service of others. So
yeah, that's great.
And I'm the most selfish person alive. I mean, so if I can do it, anyone can do it. So
I love it.
There you go.
Where can people find you?
Well, we have jimwendler.com, www.jimwendler.com. I'm on Instagram. I answer every question generally, as long as I see it on Instagram. Facebook is a dying thing. I don't really go on there. I'm not a huge social media guy, but you are more than welcome to send me a direct message. I have big fat fingers and thumbs, so you're not going to get like a 8,000 word thing, but I will be as honest as possible, and I will try not to be rude. But I grew up as a son of a coach. I've been surrounded by coaches my whole life. So it's always one of those, I try to be direct. And so just, I guess I'm not going to lie to you. That's the best thing I'll tell you. So
yeah, good stuff. All right. Yeah. Well, thanks again for being on the show.
Hey, real quick, I'm going to do this. My oldest son, he just entered college. He played football, played a bunch of sports, and he lifted, but he lifted because he did for sports. Okay. And he came out here during spring break. He lives with his mom, and we always train. I've always wanted to be an example. And he doesn't have access to a weight room. He's probably like a lot of people. He just decided one day, fuck it, I'm going to get in great shape. And remember, he didn't have access to a weight room. He had nothing. He did weight vest walks. I got him a weight vest. He started with a backpack. He did body weight squats, push-ups, and like abdominal work. Okay, that's it. That's it. He just did it every single day. And he started off with maybe like 100 squats and 50 push-ups. He's worked himself up where you can do 500 squats and 500 push-ups and like 150 chins or something, a workout. He lost so much body fat. He is absolutely shredded right now. And it's obnoxious because he's like, Dad, check this out. I'm like, God, I don't need to see you again. The point of all this is it's a partial brag. I'm super proud of him, but you don't need a lot of specialty. You just need a lot of consistency and a lot of discipline to get there. Now, if he did this it's basically did like a prison workout. He jumped rope. So the most important thing is the consistency and the discipline to do a lot of the stuff that maybe you don't really want to do. You don't need a specialty bar. You don't need a weight room with a million things in there. You just need to be able to kick ass on a daily basis. So there you go.
Yeah, no, I think that was a big lesson people took away from the pandemic, when you take away the gyms and people are like, oh, I can't train now. I mean, yeah, you can.
Yes,
It'll be painful.
Yep. Yeah. And it's like, you weren't like, my son and I were talking, I'm like, you could easily knock out 500 squats a day just throughout the day, right? I mean, you're watching TV. You could have been doing squats, me and you, for this interview. It would have been a little distracting, seeing my head. But it's amazing what happens if you have that kind of purpose and discipline. So that's the best thing I can tell everyone. Don't look for the easy way. Just look for the consistent way.
Yeah. Good talk. All right. Hope people take that away. Thanks again, Jim.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate it. And good luck. What is it? September, you said?
November.
Okay. That's right. Okay. November. All right. Did I make you panic at all? Like, shit, it was September. So, all right. Hey, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I hope everyone gets something out of this. And thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.